Hey, everybody. I am Stephanie Goss, and this is another episode of the Uncharted Podcast. This week on the podcast, I am joined by a very special guest. I am joined by my friend, Nicole Clausen. Nicole is a fellow spreadsheet nerd. Anyone who knows me and knows about my love and affinity for all things spreadsheets knows how happy it makes my heart to find a fellow spreadsheet nerd, and Nicole is one of them. She also is an inventory nerd to the nth degree, like way more than me. She loves practice management software. The very first time I connected with Nicole, I just felt like we were kind of separated at birth in some ways here because there are so many similarities. She is warm. She is funny. I love talking to her. And we had a mailbag question about inventory, and there's no better person that I could think of than Nicole. So Veterinary Inventory Nation fans who are listening and our Uncharted Podcast listeners, let's get into this.
And now, the Uncharted Podcast.
And we're back. It's me, Stephanie Goss, and this week I have the awesome pleasure of being joined by Nicole Clausen. And first of all, I'm just going to have a fangirl moment because if you don't know who Nicole is, she's going to introduce herself to you all because she has kind of an alphabet soup after her name, and there's initials in there that I don't actually even know if I know what they mean. So I always hate when people have postnominals because I'm like, I'm going to screw up the letters because it's just an alphabet soup in vet med. But Nicole is an inventory guru. She is so smart when it comes to practice management software and inventory. And for years, I kind of was following you secretly and just like watching all of your stuff and on social and was like, oh my gosh, she is so smart. And I remember when I finally got to meet you, and it was such a fangirl moment. It was like, oh my God, I'm going to do a podcast with Nicole Clausen. And so I am excited to have you on the podcast and work because we got a mailbag question that has to do with inventory. And I was like, who am I going to do this with? Of course, Nicole. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it. And thank you also for the very kind words. I'm so excited about today.
Me too. So for the people, I can't believe that there are people out there who don't know who you are, but for the people who are listening, tell them who you are.
Sure. So my name is Nicole. If we haven't met before, it's so great to meet you. So I'm an operations director turned inventory consultant. I'm a big time spreadsheet lover, and I'm ocean obsessed. So I have been in vet med for almost 20 years now. It's kind of wild to say that.
Yeah.
But when I first started managing inventory, my only training was when you shake a bottle and it feels low, you order it. And my work life changed forever when I figured out how to like set up Avamark and set up inventory. And, you know, for the last 8 years, I've been teaching folks how to do that. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I love it. I love it so much. And I felt like immediately had one of those, at least in my head, we had one of those meetings where I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to become best friends because we're both spreadsheet nerds. We both love practice management software. We both have extensive experience with Avamark, love it or hate it. Like we're all in it and inventory nerds. And so much to talk about. And I'm super excited because you have been branching out beyond just your consulting, and you wrote a book, which is fantastic. And so I'll drop the link in our show notes, but I'm just going to throw it out there to all of you. I shared it. I remember when you published, and we have a rule in the Uncharted community. You know, we don't want suitcasing, we don't want promotion, but I was like, I am posting this because what I said to them was, this is a resource that I wish that we had when I was a young manager. Like if I could go back and do anything for young managers, Stephanie, it would be have more resources because I was so hungry for knowledge. And at the time there was very little. All of it was through AHA pretty much or VSPN, and there was not a lot of resources. And so when you came out with the book about inventory management, I thought it's a freaking time. And so it is wonderful. And I said to everybody, I'm like, go buy this for your clinic inventory manager, whoever that person is. And if you don't have one, it's going to become your training Bible and you're going to use it all the time. And that's kind of why you're here today. But I'm also really excited because in addition to the book, you're doing, you have some software stuff you've nerded out on and you've branched out there. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit. but you're going to be speaking at our upcoming practice manager summit in February.
Yes.
And I am so excited because I've wanted you to do something with Uncharted for quite a while, and schedules have never worked out. And so when Ron said, I got Nicole, I was so excited. I was like, yes, it is time. And so I am super excited that you're going to be joining us. But we got this mailbag question, and I thought, okay, who better to talk this through with than Nicole? So we had a practice owner who wrote in, and I loved it because it was, hi, I'm a practice owner without a dedicated inventory manager. And honestly, inventory management has always seemed like an overwhelming task to me. So we don't have anybody specifically in charge of it. So of course, it's all over the place. I said, I don't even know where to start in terms of tracking or even ordering or setting up systems. Sounds like their method is probably the way you and I trained, which is shake the bottle and shake the bottle and guess. or look at your credit card bill and go, do I have enough room to put an order through this month? Like, right? The credit card Russian roulette. What's the best way to start getting organized without hiring someone new? Is there anything that I can do foundationally to get us going in the right direction? And bless their heart for asking the question. And it's so funny because when we were getting ready to start recording, we were talking about the episode, and I think we both agree this has Hot Mess Express written all over it. It does. Practice owner doing your inventory. Like, where do we even start? So let's start from a headspace perspective, because this does feel like a hot mess. With everything that you know, coming from the veterinary practice, coming from the day-to-day and the chaos, and knowing what it's like to be that tech or that assistant who is looking at the shelf and is like, well, there's some holes here and I feel like we need to order this, but nobody said we need to order it expressly. If you're a practice owner and this is your beast, like, where do you even start with wrapping your brain around this as a problem?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And first, I also just want to preface, like, you are not alone. I feel like inventory is just such a beastie part of vet med a lot of times.
Yeah.
Like, so, I've been there. I know a lot of other people have too. So if you're like listening and you're like, was this story written about me? Just know you are like totally not alone. So, and I think it kind of, you are really going to, I think, succeed in inventory when you have the right people in the right seats for this. So you don't necessarily, I feel like, need to hire somebody new, but find somebody who's on your team that already kind of like naturally gravitates towards like excelling in inventory, really. And so this person, right, they might love spreadsheets. They might love puzzles. They're a little bit type A. They might be really organized. They enjoy kind of the operational aspects. And I remember, when I was in practice, I started out as a CSR and I was an assistant. And so I was in vet med for a number of years before I was ever like tasked with managing inventory. And I thought that like being in vet med, like, kind of like the cool thing to do was to like follow the medicine aspect of it. But actually my brain worked really well with some of the operational things. And so I guess this is just kind of maybe a little bit of permission slip. Like, if you love the operations, like, kind of go that route. Anyways, kind of a little sidetrack there. But so I think having people who can advocate for your inventory and maybe be in charge of aspects. So maybe you don't have like one dedicated person, but maybe you might have like one person that does the ordering, another that maybe does the receiving and like organization. Maybe you have another one who does the food or the surgery suite and dental cart and dentistry and all that kind of stuff. So I think kind of like building up a little bit of a team to help you is going to be great, because as the practice owner, you are wearing about a bazillion different hats. And I mean, you have so many things on your plate that, you can get bogged down. And not only that, but like fixing your inventory can sometimes be kind of a big investment of time and energy.
Yeah.
So I think there's like that to start with. I mean, I could totally keep going, but
well, it makes sense. It makes sense, right? When we think about it from the doctor perspective, just taking the doctoring alone, Like there's that is so much more worthy of your time. And at the same time, when you're the business owner, you want things to run efficiently. You want things to be run effectively for two reasons. One, you want the headache off of your back or off of yourself. And two, you want the cost savings. Like you don't want to be just wasting money. You don't want to be throwing money away. And you know that when you're the person who's standing in front of the shelves, that there is some of that happening. So I think what you said makes total sense. And in terms of how we approach it, one of the things that I think you do really well that I admire is inventory is such a big beast, right? Because there's the actual managing of what do we carry, who do we get it from, and keeping track of the constant state of back orders and what's available, right? So there's the actual piece itself. There's the organizational piece, like you mentioned, keeping things neat and tidy, figuring out where the heck to fit everything in your average hospital, which wasn't built with a stock room in mind. Almost no hospitals that I've ever been in have been. And so it's usually like you got some in a closet over here, you got stuff shoved in shelves down up front, you got crap everywhere. So there's that organizational piece of it as well. And then there's the whole budgeting piece and the financial piece of it. And how does that play into everything else, the cost of goods piece. And the last piece is really the practice management software piece. And I need some sort of system so that I make sure that if, there's a price increase with something that I'm buying from, BI and it all of a sudden goes up, $20 a bottle, that I have a flag system so that I don't just eat that cost and it's a year later and I'm going, why are we losing so much money on this product, right? So there's that whole inventory piece. And I think for a lot of people, even a practice owner who is probably a little bit of that type A person, like you mentioned, who might like spreadsheets and like the organization, standing in front of that big unwieldy beast of a project feels overwhelming. And
like trying to put an octopus back in a box.
Yes, there's arms everywhere.
Yes. And they all have minds of their own.
Yes. And so I think from a headspace perspective, I love that you normalize it and you're not alone. And this is totally one of those episodes, you're not wrong, where people are going to be like, they're talking about my practice. and I think that the thing for me, the big headspace piece, is recognizing that this is the octopus, this is the elephant, right? This is huge. And this is not going to be something that goes from where you are now. And it's a spectrum, right? Inventory in general is a spectrum and everybody does it differently. I remember when you and I recorded an episode for your podcast and we were talking about our own experiences in the practice and even just the differences and nuances when I talk to other people who have done inventory in how they set things up and how they have things in the computer and what their processes are. Like you and I could nerd out about that all day. And I think that's the other headspace piece for me, is to recognize that everyone is going to do it a little bit differently because you're trying to suit your practice, right? And your needs, your workflow, all of those things. And so recognizing that what works for someone else may work for you and it may not, and that's okay too. And part of this is figuring out where on that spectrum of I'm the practice owner standing in front of the shelves with no system and I'm a massive, giant, 24/7 specialty emerge hospital that has a stock room and a central supply and all of the, machines that dispense the drugs to me for controlled drugs and everywhere in between. And so you've got to figure out if you're at one end and you want to move closer to the other end, that's not, let me just jump in and figure it out. That's a process. And so I think from a headspace perspective, recognizing that part of your job as the owner is to figure out, what does success look like for you? Are you in the space where you just want to not listen to your team go, we're out of Baytril again? Or are you in the place where you want to get an automatic alert that the cost of something has gone up significantly? Like, where are you at and what are you trying to work yourself towards? I mean, when you work with someone in their practice, where do you start with them in terms of figuring out which bucket do I even start with?
Yeah. And I feel like, getting started, I will kind of like, of course, preface this with, and kind of already like you mentioned, is there is no one best way to do this. And so like, especially when you're just getting started in this process, I just like invite you so much to be curious about this and think about like your team, what success looks like, what is your kind of like future state that you're working towards, and to just really kind of bring curiosity to it and almost like a little bit of a spirit of like playfulness to like see what works. Because some practices, they like super thrive with their practice management system and they're like, we use it to the literal T. And then some practices are like, I don't even have a PIMS that works with me. So they use a totally different system. So, but kind of when you're getting started, I think the biggest thing is just kind of taking almost like a little step back to just do like a quick, like 30,000 foot bird's eye audit of where you're at. So just, does it have to take a lot of time, but thinking about like, do I have any expired meds on this shelf? Do I have, any broken things? Do I have, a ton of like just extra stuff stashed somewhere? And just kind of take it a step back, because I think when we're like working day to day buzzing in our practice, sometimes we kind of have a little bit of blinders on. So we almost need to like take a step back and just kind of reflect on what our inventory looks like and just kind of like how it's functioning right now. And sometimes just like that audit can be really helpful. And I kind of think about like the flow or cycle of inventory in your practice. And so like I'm a really visual person. So a lot of times, right, there's kind of like 6 different categories, 6 different like stops the inventory makes in your practice. So like the first one is like purchase planning and forecasting, right? So this is where you like figuring out what's low, all that kind of stuff. Then you want to order it. Then you receive it, you organize it, you make sure it's priced appropriately. Then you're selling and consuming it. And the last one is you're optimizing it. So a lot of times if you're thinking like, where do I even start with this beast? You can kind of like picture that flow of inventory and be like, where is the piece that I know is really, really off? So for example, if you are finding that you're running out all the time, or, just ordering is a mess and you're like, oh my gosh, we're running out, or we're ordering every day, we want to focus first on that purchase planning and forecasting section. And then we can kind of like start diving in deeper there. But if you're like, oh, actually, we order things pretty good right now, we don't have too much, but I can't even remember the last time we changed our inventory prices or reviewed that, that's where we want to look at our pricing. So that can be just kind of like a little bit of a helpful guidepost. But if you're listening and you're like, okay, yeah, but I still don't know, probably the best place to start is with that forecasting and purchase planning and really kind of identifying, quote unquote, what low means and quantifying that, because that really will serve as the foundation for really everything that you do. So that's really kind of, I think, really the first place to start, because like if you think about gabapentin, right, and you ask your team, everyone on your team, like, what is low for gabapentin, you'll probably get a different answer for every single person. So we kind of want to like normalize that and quantify that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a super helpful exercise too, just to get a sense, like if you don't have a starting place to ask your team, that actual question is so great. Or trazodone is another one. Like, how much trazodone do you want to have on the shelf? Because they are consuming that, not themselves, but they are consuming it for patients, right? Like those are meds that we're reaching for all day, every day. And especially if you're, in a fear-free practice. And so if you ask the team, what does low mean? You're probably going to get somebody who's like, oh, well, when the bottle's empty, I want to put it on the thing and order it. okay. And then you're going to have the person who's like, oh, with how much we use that, we shouldn't have less than 6 bottles on the shelf. You know?
Totally. We need 5,000 tablets at all times.
Right. Because there's nothing that we like better than counting those giant 1,000-count bottles, you know? But it is true, and I think that's a great point. And I think for a lot of people, they struggle with the idea of, okay, as a doctor, my doctors have always said to me, well, I want to have it here when I need it. And the hard part when somebody else is trying to do the inventory for you, what the hell does that mean? Like, you know, I'm not in your brain. I don't know what your caseload is like. I don't know if we work together a long time, maybe I have a sense of what drugs you like over others and when you might prescribe a med over others. But I think part of it is getting out of your doctor brain as the practice owner. What does success look like in the practice from that perspective? So the pre-planning, if you don't want to quote unquote run out of anything, what does that actually mean? And I think this is one of the hardest spaces because it involves behavioral changes on the part of the team. Because what so many of the team don't recognize, because for a lot of us, we get used to the convenience. I mean, I remember when I started in vet med and we had to call up, you know, I called up MWI or I called up Butler and I was like, hey, Mariva, hey, Babs, like, this is what I need for the day. And I would literally read out my list to them. And it was not fast. It was a 2 to 3, you know, it was like a 2 to 3 day standard turnaround. And over the years, the ordering process has gotten faster. The shipping options have gotten faster. The cost has gone up as well, but to commensurate with that, but we've gotten used to the convenience of I can push a button and we can have it here tomorrow. And I see so many practices where the behavior of the team is taking for granted how quickly we can order and get in medications. And so I think that this is one of those really hard areas if this is your pain point, because it doesn't just involve whoever's going to be the person making the shopping list and looking at the shelves and doing that work. It involves the team as a whole to change that behavior so that everybody understands, not only to your point, what does low mean? Like how much should we have on the shelf, and everybody getting on the same page there, but also then what does it mean to notify someone? What does it mean to communicate? Hey, you know, we need this, and how urgently do we need it? Because how many times have we come back? Like for me as a manager, my favorite was every single time. I think I probably can't even think of a time that I went on vacation and I didn't come back to some sort of inventory on my desk with a sticky note that said, we need this. Whether it was like whether it was something broken that needed to get fixed, or it was something we were completely out of or whatever. But that is every hospital experiences that at some point in time. And so how that is not a me problem. It may be, because the system may be broken, but that is also the team problem. And I can't change that on my own. I need their help and their buy-in to change that.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the other traps that I think sometimes practices get into is because things can get overnighted or next day, that they're like, oh, I really only need to keep very little on the shelf because
Yes.
I can't get it so quickly.
Yes.
But then you get in the trap where you're ordering every single day.
Yes.
And now there's like order minimums and there's shipping costs. And so there is this, we kind of like, I think about it like reactive ordering, where instead of like planning proactively, right? And because that's ultimately kind of the goal, is to proactively plan. We get into the space where it's like super reactive and we're reacting to what's low. It's really chaotic. And I think, you know, day to day, our practices are chaotic and busy enough. We don't need to add to that chaos.
Yes.
You know, with not having kind of like our inventory set up, because it can be so chaotic.
Yes.
And then it like really affects every single part of the practice.
Yes.
So yeah, that kind of sometimes can be a little bit of a sticky trap that people can find themselves in.
For sure. Because, and that doesn't even take into account then when you do go to order and someone tells you, oh, hey, we need this. And so maybe you are ordering every day. Well, what happens when you get online and, oh, it's back ordered, and now it's 6 o'clock. It's been a chaotic day. everybody went home an hour ago and I'm still sitting there looking on Vetcove trying to figure out who can actually get me product because now I'm out of it, right? And so there's this whole time suck that involves me as the person doing the ordering, but that involves behavior of the rest of the team as a whole. And so I think that's one of those big ones. And I think it's why it's important as the owner, as the person who has the capability and the authority behind them to drive change in the practice. Part of what is so important in moving from Headspace into how do we actually tackle this problem is planning. What does the end look like? Like what is your goal? Where do you want to get to so that you can clearly communicate that? Because if your goal is to just say, well, I don't want to run out of stuff. If I'm, your vet assistant and you say, hey, Stephanie, you love spreadsheets. Can I give you this piece of the project? And you tell me, I just don't want to run out of stuff. I'm set up to fail before I even start. Because what does that even mean? And how do I, even if I do my best job possible, I can't control the rest of the team and what is happening in the other exam rooms and in the treatment room. So I love that. Let's take a quick break and then let's talk about how do we actually tackle this? Like what would be your top tips for, besides doing the audit, which I love that one. I love that idea of looking at the cycle and figuring out where your biggest pain point is. How do you tackle standing in front of this beast and figuring out where do I start? Okay. So we talked kind of about the headspace and about this is a hot mess. And this is something that a lot of practices are going to resonate with. You're not alone if you're listening and you're like, oh, okay, this is me. And also this is not you snap your fingers and it gets fixed kind of problem. This is a multi-step, multi-month, maybe even multi-year process, depending on where you want to get to. And if you've done all of that mental, headspace work to kind of think through some of that, but the real crux of the question was, where do I start? Like, how do I action this? How do I stop being scared of inventory management? And how do I start solving the problem in my practice? You have been that team member who has touched inventory just in the day-to-day of your job. You have been the CSR who picks up the phone and is talking to the client who's frustrated because they are out of the meds and you don't have it on the shelf. And now you've got to wait and explain to them why you've got to wait. You've been the inventory manager. You have been working for years now with clients in terms of answering really this basic question. So what do you think, Nicole, are your, like, if you were going to give this practice owner three things to think about or three things to look at, where would you start?
Yeah, such a great question. And I just have lots of ideas. So first and foremost, the number one thing that is going to just change the game for you for inventory management is calculating and using what are called reorder points. If you have not heard of a reorder point before, there's kind of like two pieces in that. So it's the reorder point, which is kind of the low level or the point where you would reorder.
Okay.
So this is essentially like low quantified. So then we have your reorder quantity. And so this is basically once you've reached that low level, how much you're going to order. So, and we want to kind of the whole premise behind this is this concept, which is called demand forecasting, which basically uses our previous sales and purchase history to predict what we'll use in the future.
Okay.
So for example, if like the past 3 months, you've sold 3,000 gabapentin, you're probably going to assume that in the next 3 months, you'll sell a similar 3,000 gabapentin.
Sure.
So that's kind of like where that starts. And so if you're just getting started, there's really just two easy schools of thought to start with. Is when you have a 2-week supply to order another 2-week supply, or when you have a 2-week supply to order a 30-day supply. And so it might depend on your storage space. It might depend on your budget. So it kind of is unique to the practice. Mm-hmm. But the whole idea of like ordering when we have a 2-week supply is it gives us a little bit of a buffer and a pause between, and kind of it gets it out of this reactive place. Because let's say, for example, every Monday morning you order, but Tuesday you realize that something is running low. you wouldn't order until the following Monday, and then you need time for it to come in with a little bit of extra buffer. So setting our reorder points at a 2-week supply kind of gives us a little bit of spaciousness to not be so like reactive ordering. So that is like that's like the first place I started. And actually what I did so I also, there's kind of like 3 different categories of like reorder flags, which lets you know when something needs to be ordered without relying on somebody telling you. And so these could look like entering these order points into your practice management software, because then how it would work, then when it's time for you to order, you run a report and it shows you everything that's running low. You can also use like reorder tags. So there's a lot of other methods, and I could go on and on and on about it. But what I started doing is every time I would place an order, for everything that was on that order, I would calculate those order points and add them into my software. And so each time I placed an order, it took a little bit longer, but the things that I was ordering most frequently, those were getting those reorder points set up. And so then eventually everything got set up.
Okay. So you took it a little chunk at a time, and just like, if this order, I ordered 5 things, like I'm just going to tackle figuring out those 5 things and then putting it into the software so that it is correctly withdrawing basically from that pool when you dispense it to a pet, whether you're doing it in-house or you're sending it home. So then the computer flags it for you when it's time to reorder. Where though, like, so if you're the person who doesn't have anything in their PIMS yet, how do you figure out how much you've been ordering and how often you've been ordering it? Like, where do you even start with that process? Because I know that that's overwhelming to a lot of people who are maybe not. I heart my practice owners, and I've worked with a lot of them who their filing system is literally like paper files that the bills just get shoved in. So where do I even start with that?
Yeah, so there's 2 kind of places to start. So if you use your practice management system to bill your clients, that's perfect, because really what we want to do is use the information from your sales report. So even if you're not using the inventory module and you're just billing your clients, that's perfect, because then you can pull a sales history report and you can see like, oh, in the last X number of months, I've sold this many gabapentin, this many trazodone. And then so you can calculate what that average use is. Now, if you are not using a practice management system, or that's not how you bill your clients, you can also use your purchase history to calculate that. I always caution that a little bit, because if you were over ordering and you calculate your order points based upon your purchase history, it'll just perpetuate that over ordering. So if you're able to, I highly strongly suggest using your sales reports from your software. But if you don't have access to that, starting with your purchase history is a good place to start. But then you can also, like, because we're starting small, right? Maybe you're starting with your top 10 products, your top 5 products. You can kind of in the back of your mind be like, okay, I'm going to set these, but I'm also going to check to see, am I using them often enough in comparison to how much I'm purchasing? So you can kind of like, check yourself a little bit there. So that's kind of like where you can get this information to kind of start with that.
And I think my like manager tip, especially for my practice owners who may or may not know, but for younger managers as well, like if you don't know where to start with that, and the idea of like the sales, if you're not using something, if you're not ordering through your distributor software, and or if you're not ordering through a system like Vetco where you can go to the computer and pull up the report, this is where you phone a friend and you call whoever your distributor is and you say, hey, I need help. Like I need to tackle this. I need your help with this piece. And this is where they will come help you, and they will come in so that you're not taking yourself out of the exam room to deal with this problem. They will come in, they will help you they can give you the sales reports. They can tell you what your top 10, top 100, whatever you want to know, they're going to be your best friend in terms of the data and the spreadsheet. So if you don't have that person in your practice, ask your sales rep for help, because they will absolutely come in and help you figure out where to get started and do it on your terms. They may get overly excited and be like, well, I can come in and do everything. And if that overwhelms you, say, I appreciate that. And can we start with my top 5 most frequently purchased items? And like, can we do that? Like, to your point, can we do those? Can I get them all set up in Avmark so that they're going to start deducting as we go? And then can you give me like a month or a week or however long you need? And then can you come back and can we do 5 more? Like you said, it will take longer, but work at your own pace. Like, don't, because if you have someone in your practice who gets excited about this, or who is like, ooh, I have watched Nicole on social media, I could read her book and I could take her classes and I would love to learn about that. They're going to get excited, and then they're going to be like, oh, let me revamp the whole thing. If that overwhelms you, just say that. And it doesn't have to move at warp speed. You don't go from having no plan to everything without taking some steps in the middle. So I think phone a friend and be okay to say, this is how I want to move, and recognize when you might need to move a little bit faster, because we know that change is scary. Vet med doesn't do change well.
It's hard.
It's hard.
And I think, when we are like setting up our inventory, and really when we're setting up anything in our practice, we really want to think about like sustainability in mind. So like sometimes if we're moving super quickly, we might be like, okay, I'm just trying to like put an emergency band-aid on this situation. But really we want to like, craft, it's really about crafting, crafting these systems that set our practice up for success in the long term, and not just like, I know sometimes it can be really tempting, like, oh my gosh, I just need to like figure this out right now. But, keeping in mind that, that pace and, of sustainability.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, okay, we start with the sales report and we start with the order history, and we're looking at those 2 things and figuring out, do these even sync up? Do they make sense? We're figuring out like, what is that reorder point based off of that information. Then, like you said, some people choose to like go all in, and I've seen practices where they're like, we're going to close down, we're going to do an inventory count, we're going to put everything in the computer, and that's where we're going to start. And then other people who have taken your approach, which is like, every time I order, I'm going to update the items that are on that order, and eventually I'll get through my whole inventory and everywhere in between. So if everybody kind of starts there, what's the next thing besides looking at the reorder points that is like the low-hanging fruit that is going to really help with the overwhelm?
Yeah. So the next piece is doing what I call the red dot challenge.
Okay.
And this is really like, oh my gosh, seriously, like such a great exercise, because it helps you to visualize and really kind of understand what products are moving, what products are just sitting on the shelf. And so basically kind of how it works is on day 1, you put a red dot sticker on everything in your inventory. You might not need to do hospital supplies, but I definitely recommend like every bottle of pharmaceuticals, every bottle of injectables. Then after day 1, you don't add any more dots. So then you see how many dots remain after 30 days, 60 days, and then 90 days.
Okay.
And so ideally, right, we want most of our red dots to be gone by 30 to 60 days. And so if we have products that still have stickers after 60 days, 90 days, we know that it's just kind of sitting on the shelf. And I always like to think about it, right? If we think about the pill bottles on the shelf, basically just stuff with dollar bills. And so if that inventory is just kind of like stuck sitting on the shelf, that's basically cash that's trapped on the shelf, locked up, and then we're not able to like invest it. So we want to like think about, how often am I bringing products in and then they're being sold or used. And so that red dot challenge is like such a good activity to just kind of like visualize and understand, what are my products that are my movers and shakers versus what are my products that just kind of sit on the shelf. And maybe I need to adjust the package size that I'm purchasing. Maybe I want to move these to my online pharmacy exclusively. So it kind of like just enables so much information. And I'll have some folks that do it and they'll do the red dot challenge and they'll call me like a year later and they're like, Nicole, I still have products with red dots like a year later.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. And it's true. And the thing that is interesting to me as the manager was always how often leaders or my practice owners could hyper focus on, well, but I need this thing for when that case comes in. Okay, that's totally fine. Like if we need, I'm trying to think of one of those things where if we need an emergency drug or we need the Pitocin for the, emergency dog in labor case. Fine. But it's amazing how often people hyper focus on that. And to your point earlier, put those blinders on about the 6 months of HeartGuard or Revolution Plus that's sitting on the shelf, right? But they're like, but you're telling me I can't have that bottle of injectable drug. No, I'm not. If there's a medical need for that and you need to have it here, great, fine. It may have a red dot a year later, and that's okay because some drugs like that have that never-ending life cycle because you need it for the emergency case. And I would argue, especially if you're like I live really rurally, we carry some of those things and a lot of the time they expire on the shelf, but we have them because when the case comes through the door, we need to have it because there is no other option, right? There is nowhere else to go. So some of those drugs we purchase with that in mind, but it amazes me how often we can hyper fixate on that. And the reality is the cost of those meds is often just so tiny and fractional when you look at what you have the blinders on to, and we look at, well, but what about the 7 types of antibiotics that are sitting on the shelf? That, to your point, like that's hundreds of bills shoved in those bottles that if we, okay, fine, you can have the, drug on the injectable on the shelf. Let's talk about those pill bottles that are sitting there. Let's talk about the preventatives where we have 5 different kinds. Let's talk about those big things. And so often, like for me, when we're talking about it in Uncharted, that's one of the first things that I ask them is like, when's the last time you looked at that overstock? What do you have a huge amount of? And how did you get it? Did you get it because a relief doctor was there and they said, hey, I need you to order me this. And somebody just ordered 7 cases. Like how did you get to that point? And then how do you deal with it so that point doesn't come again? Because if it's sitting there with red dots on it a year later, that's a thing that needs to probably go away unless it falls in that category. And so it was amazing to me how easy my job became when I took away that blocker, that fixation blocker for my doctors. Because I would always have the doctor who was like, but I want this specific antibiotic for this. Okay, fine. I don't care. Like, let it go. Just channel my Elsa. I'm just going to let it go. Right? With my long hair flowing behind me. And I'm going to focus on all the other stuff because that's where I can make a big, big dent and a big, big impact is the 6 months worth of, preventative or the 7 different types of antibiotics that are sitting on the shelf, not the, single type of antibiotic that they need to have or the injectable.
Right. Yeah. Like one bottle of injectable emergency meds that's like $10.
Right.
Is like literally, dust compared to like the 5 different types of flea and tick prevention that you stock the 4 to 9 pound size on, which turns out to be like a years and years and years and years supply, Yeah. So, it's balance. And yeah, I think sometimes we can hyper focus and we're like, oh, I need to have enough. So just in case like a busload of Great Danes comes in. And I think that this is like, sometimes when we are like kind of in our head about it, we're like, oh, I need to have enough, right? But what does enough mean? Yeah. And so I think that's when we can bring in that data and that kind of that information, and that kind of gives us this confidence to be like, okay, this is what my practice truly needs. This is what it needs for patient care. And so I think, even if sometimes it's a little intimidating to bring in that data, it can give us so much confidence and really empower us to make better decisions and guide our purchasing.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we're gonna look at the workflow, and then we're gonna look at the sales history, and we're gonna look at the order history, and we're gonna try and sort out those reorder points. And no matter how we choose, whatever system we choose, like that is gonna make a big impact. And then we're gonna do the red dot challenge, and we're gonna sticker the heck out of everything and see, what stickers are left at the end of this. And to your point, when we very first started, this is where let your team have fun. Like, get them whale stickers, get them, it doesn't have to be a red dot. Like don't take Nicole literally. Have fun with it. If you're going to ask your team to put, stickers on every single thing that you have in the hospital, let them have fun. Make it creative. One time we did it, we had googly eyes on everything. And so there's googly eyes on everything in the practice that was consumable, right? One time it was, it was kid stickers, like have fun with it. Let them have fun with it and gamify it, because no one wants to, if you're not that person who loves inventory, spending your afternoon doing one of those kind of tasks is like, oh, this is not something I really want to be doing. I'd rather be taking care of pets. So let them get into it. Let them have fun where you can. Is there something else that you would say kind of rounds out that trio of where to really start, where you can make an impact in the overwhelm?
Yeah. So I would say definitely, right, like we said, start with those order points, look at your sales history, do the red dot challenge or the sticker challenge, make it cute, make it fun. But then also one of the things I think from like a financial perspective is to really look at, especially this year, we've had so many cost increases, and think about what is my systems right now where if my costs go up, how am I increasing my prices? And so, with our services, right, they might be increased every 6 months, maybe every quarter, but our inventory should be increased. Our prices should be increased as soon as those costs go up. Thinking about, and this especially comes back to our most valuable products, right? Our flea tick prevention, our heartworm prevention, Apoquel, like a lot of those big expensive things. What do our margins look like on those products? When was the last time that we increased our prices as our costs went up? And so evaluating that is so important. And again, it's kind of more of a minutia, right, where we're kind of like digging into each individual item. But let's say, for example, your heartworm prevention has gone up twice and you haven't increased your price, your margins might be like razor thin.
Yeah.
And you might be
you're losing money.
A ton of money. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is really so key. And then once we kind of have like looked at those, then we want to figure out what is my system going forward to make sure that my prices are increased appropriately. So usually kind of a good way to do this is to receive it into your practice management system. And then each item is set up with a markup percent. And so basically what happens is if your costs go up, your practice management system knows that. And so it'll be like, oh, would you like to increase this from $1.05 to $1.75? And then a lot of times you can say yes or no. So you're not like bound by anything, but there is kind of this way of increasing your prices without manually kind of having to be like, oh, did our costs go up? So that can be just a really helpful piece to put into play.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's another area too, where sometimes we are on worst end, because the number one response that I have had, or back I've had from both my doctors, my practice owner and team is, well, but the pets that are on chronic meds, I don't want to regularly increase the price. Like I don't want it to be a different price every time they come in. Well, guess what? If we are paying a different price and we are, we have to recover that somehow. And gone are the days where when I started in vet med, the margins on our in-house pharmacy were so high that if our price went up on something, even a chronic med, I could eat that cost increase 2, 3, 4, 10 times sometimes before I hit that line where it was like, okay, now I'm losing money. And over the years, that ship has righted itself, and it needed to. It needed to. And I think for a lot of us, we get upside down real quick and we don't realize how upside down we are. And there have been times, even as much as I love inventory and I love my PIMs, where I've gone in and I'm like, when the heck did we stop charging? Like, we've been losing money on this for the last 6 months because we chose to hit that no button, but yet we've had 2 price increases or 3 price increases. And so I love that point of, hey, this is a thing that you have to think about regularly, whether you like it or not. And again, you know, our sales reps love them and they try and be so helpful. And they're like, here you go ahead of time. I would always, like, I'd have a stack in my box. Here's all the upcoming price increase. Here's the sheets. That's great. Someone in the practice still has to look at, what are you actually charging the client? Whether you have your inventory in your PIMs or not, someone has to go in and manually figure that out. And again, this is an area where use your sales reps to help you. Ask them, say, hey, I need to compare these things. I have had sales reps who are like, oh, I love a good spreadsheet. Like, if you like, I'll come in and I'll make the spreadsheet for you. Like, you know, you sit me down in front of a computer and I'll do the thing. Ask them for help. Maybe it's, you know, that they'll come in and get lunch for your team while somebody does this, you know, and you run an inventory count at the same time. Like, think about those ways where you can partner with your partners. That's what they're there for. And the data piece is one of those pieces that I have found most helpful, especially if you're not a spreadsheet lover like Nicole and I.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, you know, with our like branded products and brand name products, a lot of times they will put out an issue. Oh, I'm increasing prices. You know, this is what they're going to be. But there's also all those products that aren't branded, like our gabapentin and trazodone and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on, that don't give notices. So if you're only relying on those notices, you might miss a whole big, huge group of products that are going up in cost without you even realizing it.
Yes. Yes. And if those products are the ones that you're selling in bulk, it's amazing how quickly that has a financial impact to your budget, you know, because yes, you might think about the really expensive, you know, preventative that is a 3-in-1 and sitting on your shelf, like that registers. And you, like you said, you have the sales sheet for it. But if I'm selling, you know, 3 times as much gabapentin or trazodone as I am that preventative, and I lose out on those price increases because I hit no or somebody didn't pay attention to it, that quantity adds up significantly faster than the margin difference on the more expensive item. And I think that's something that takes time for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. And so I love that. Well, I could nerd out with you about inventory all day long. And we didn't even get to nerd on spreadsheets or PIMs. Like, so I'm super glad that you're going to be coming to Practice Manager Summit, and we'll have all the details to that in the show notes. So if you're like, ooh, I would love to come and pick Nicole's brain and learn more about inventory and managing things, we've got you. And that is coming up in February, like I said, and we will put where people can find you on the interwebs in the show notes, right? You're on the social media. Like, that's how I followed you. Where's the best place for people to follow you these days?
Yeah, so you can find me on Facebook. I run a Facebook group for inventory managers. It's just called the Veterinary Inventory Management Group. Find me there. I also have my own podcast, the Inventory Nation podcast.
Yep.
I'm not super on Instagram these days, but you can also find me there.
Yeah.
I'm also on LinkedIn. So yeah, just I'd love for you to, if you need help, if you need to vent, if you need to do anything at all, you know, there's a whole inventory manager community cheering you on. So
Yes, I love it. I love it so much. Thank you, Nicole, for being here and nerding out with me for a hot minute today. This was so much fun. And like I said, we'll put links to all of that in the show notes. And until next time, I'm going to let you sign us off because I love how you sign off your emails and everything, because I feel like it is just so you. And every time I read one of your emails and I see your closing signature, I'm just like, I see your smiling face in my head, and it just is so great. So I'm going to say until next time. And then you say,
for the oceans.
For the oceans. I love it so much. I love it so much. Thanks, Nicole.
And that's a wrap on another episode of the Uncharted Podcast. Thanks for joining us and spending your week with us. If you enjoyed this week's episode, head over to wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. It's the best way to let us know that you love listening. We'll see you next time.